As I have stated numerous times in the past, false beliefs are perhaps the most pernicious and unyielding root of all problems in the world, and any beliefs held in contradiction to natural law are simply, well, wrong. And this applies to all opinions for which we don't somehow have an immutable right to create our own fantastical false realities, but rather a personal responsibility. Natural law is objective truth. And objective truth is all that matters in reality, because natural law always manifests in the end, despite any personal opinions to the contrary. Any ideas, beliefs, propaganda, and information communicated or shared with others that are merely subjective, unverified opinions, or purposeful deception not aligned with natural law or objective truth can, and most times will, result in negative consequences when acted upon by those without the discernment or critical thinking skills to understand the difference. Most, if not all, of what we are told by the governments, corporate-controlled media, and repeated ad nauseum by the mindless, know-it-all masses suffering from FOMO and eager to poke their noses into every single crisis or drama is essentially a quagmire of fabricated lies designed to confuse, manipulate, and control the mind of the masses. If we don't overcome this Achilles heel and profound human weakness, we will be fully enslaved sooner rather than later. All violations of natural law will eventually result in negative consequences being borne by either individuals, families, entire communities, or whole societies, depending on how many act accordingly. And the more violations incurred, the more chaos throughout civilization, and the quicker we descend into despotism for our own common good, as the only supposed and dialectical pre-planned solution to the manufactured problems and crises. We are on the precipice right now of ending up in a totalitarian nightmare from which humanity may never escape, because the majority have chosen the convenient lie over the more challenging truth much more often than not in most of what they believe. And therein lies the secret to breaking free of our chains and building a better society on the ashes of this empire of deception. We must stop believing in lies. Stop pretending that lies are irrefutable truth. Stop pretending that lies are harmless. And stop acting like wounded children when our beliefs are challenged. It's time for humanity to grow up and evolve to higher levels of consciousness if we ever hope to reclaim our inherent sovereignty and begin to heal our world and the human condition. But that is just the foundation for the real topic of this video, which is the supposed legitimacy, validity, and power of the Constitution. One of the most widely held false beliefs in the world today, not just in America, but internationally, is that a nation's constitution somehow protects the individuals of each nation from the oppressive forces of government, because they don't. As we've seen over the past 21 months, and going back much farther than that, our rights and freedoms have not been protected from the overreach, oppression, or coercion from any government entity throughout the entire world. Every single constitutional government in this world has gone along in complete lockstep with the greatest lie and psyop in human history. So how are those constitutions working out for you now? And then there are the people who claim that the Constitution is simply being violated, and if we just get the right people into government, all will be fine in this world. Well, that method has been tried for nearly the past 70 years by members of the John Birch Society and many other constitutionally minded organizations and individuals who have attempted in vain to right the ship. They have all been utter failures in their activities and mental gymnastics, because look at where we are now. Government is a cruel joke on humanity, and no documents written over 200 years ago have or even should have any legal standing in the world today, because so much has changed since then. This is not to say that there are not great ideas and philosophical foundations of these documents, and that those should be forgotten and thrown out. No, but it is to say that we are not bound by their supposed and perpetual enforceability, whose only and true purpose was to restrain the governments they were written to create and not allow them to become the all-powerful entities they've become. Because clearly, they haven't been adhered to, and we find ourselves today living in a world defined by a gross imbalance of power. All constitutions have been violated in many ways, and humanity has suffered because of it, all the while falsely believing that it is their pacifier and safety blanket. Again, it is time to grow up. To support this claim of constitutional impotence, deception, and confusion, I will use the very words from two of America's founding fathers, as well as perhaps the most vociferous critic of the Constitution in American history. Because again, most of what people blindly choose to believe without any effort to research or verify is simply not true in any way, shape, or form. And to continue moving forward in this illegitimate state of false reality is not only illogical and irrational, it is beyond absurd and extremely dangerous and detrimental to all of human existence, as well as our very survival as a species. We have been told our entire lives that the American Constitution is the pinnacle of all societal foundations and law in human history, and that it is seemingly unchallengeable in its construct, other than by supposedly elected representatives of the people who can change and amend it as they deem necessary. All on behalf of we the people, of course, and only in our supposed best interests. We are then told that we are all bound by these words they deem as law via some etheric social contract of which we are all obligated to obey every single one of these laws without our physical signature or consent, and to oppose them is somehow un-American or unpatriotic. It's just another form of gaslighting in a world that seems to thrive on deception and prefers willful submission, immorality, and intellectual sloth over honesty, integrity, and wisdom. The fact that so many believe our current American Constitution is the foundational basis for protection against overreach and oppression by government is astounding, given what the world has become in our lifetimes thus far, and even those of past generations. And things are only getting worse by the day. Also, for the mindless masses to continue invoking their constitutional rights when their rights are inherent and not given by a piece of paper or their government, but a matter of our very existence by an omnipotent creator, shows how indoctrinated they have become. For people not to see that the Constitution itself is essentially being used as a sort of psychological tool of oppression and not protection shows the power of compulsory government schooling and a system of pervasive and controlled messaging by a hijacked and weaponized media machine. If we ever hope to truly be free, we must overcome our dogmatic belief and support of this archaic model, let go of the past as well as our false opinions, and create a new system in which our rights are truly protected and are unable to be taken away. This is the ultimate goal of the Freedom Project 2020. But getting back to the thoughts and concerns of many of our founding fathers, I will use the words written by both Noah Webster and Thomas Jefferson to prove beyond mere speculation that the Constitution written and ratified by the original 13 states was never intended to be perpetual, living, or the conclusive document ever written for the purpose of social order and supreme law. As we will see, it was written to protect them in their time against forces opposed to their beliefs and the tyranny from which they had escaped in Europe and the British Empire during their lives. In an article written by Noah Webster in December of 1787, just 2 months after the ratification of the Constitution for the United States of America, he had some very strong convictions to convey on a number of subjects concerning this new nation and its supreme law of the land. It's a very telling article he penned because it clearly shows his admiration for the Constitution, his faith that it fully kept power in the hands of the people, and his belief that an added Bill of Rights was unnecessary and redundant, and a system with an elective legislature. Because he felt that an additional document that protected against the encroachments from an elected body of representatives was essentially protection against our own choices. He clearly didn't foresee the possibility of corruption in this new form of government, and many of his comments support this naive blind spot. Interestingly, though, even as it is more so now, he didn't hold much trust in the majority of the population to be able to think for themselves very clearly. Curiously, after putting full faith in this new system of government by and of the people, he then goes on to state that he had little faith in at least half of the electorate anyway, essentially negating his stance that an elected body of representatives would never try to harm the electorate. In his words, one half of the people who read books have so little ability to apply what they read to their own practice that they had better not read at all. He clearly believed that most people had little cognitive ability to make good decisions, which is why there were such restrictions on the electorate at the time. They understood that only truly educated and critical thinkers realized what was at stake. If you look at the world today, the ability for critical thought and making truly informed decisions is all but extinct in society, as the past 21 months has proven beyond any doubt whatsoever. Just spend about 10 minutes in any social media thread or post comment section, and you'll see the incredible level of pervasive ignorance and idiocy in society. So he makes the argument that a Bill of Rights is an unnecessary addendum because the rights are inherent in the people who supposedly hold the power via representation, but he also showed a bit of gullibility in his faith of the people to actually remain vigilant in keeping its government in check. Nonetheless, given his belief in this form of government, he then goes on to state that the Constitution should only remain in effect for his current generation and no longer. Here again, I suppose after the end of the war, however, he assumed that people would understand the vital importance in ensuring the success of this fledgling nation and its newly created form of government. He truly believed that it was a government of the people and that the representatives would always do what was in the best interest of their constituents. He clearly didn't foresee the immense power of lobbies, the negative influence of bribery by massive corporations on representatives in government, and the types of corruptible and sociopathic individuals who would eventually come to seek positions of power in governments all over the world. Which is perhaps why he went on to state in very specific words that the Constitution itself should only remain in effect for his then current generation. He writes, "I undertake to prove that a standing Bill of Rights is absurd, because no constitutions in a free government can be unalterable. The present generation have indeed a right to declare what they deem a privilege, but they have no right to say what the next generation shall deem a privilege. A state is a supreme corporation that never dies. Its powers, when it acts for itself, are at all times equally extensive, and it has the same right to repeal a law this year as it had to make it the last. If therefore our posterity are bound by our constitutions and can neither amend nor annul them, they are to all intents and purposes our slaves. Have we then a right to say that our posterity shall not be judges of their own circumstances? The very attempt to make perpetual constitutions is the assumption of a right to control the opinions of future generations, and to legislate for those over whom we have as little authority as we have over a nation in Asia." So there you have it. As we will soon see, this was a sentiment held by many of the Founding Fathers. The idea that the Constitution they wrote to establish a new form of government, not based on the traditional theocracy or monarchy and parliamentary systems, was to be perpetual into a completely unknown future, was not one held by these wise men. Yet here we are, 234 years and 8 generations past that time, and we are stuck in this false paradigm that we are perpetually bound to and must revere this document that was never meant to be perpetual or adhered to with such mindless, cultish, and dogmatic belief. In a letter written from Paris, France by Thomas Jefferson to James Madison, dated September 6, 1789, 2 years after the ratification of the Constitution, he also conveyed these same reservations about the perpetuity of the Constitution, for which they themselves had incredible input and investment. The ideas put forth in this letter, however, have been largely overlooked and perhaps suppressed on purpose by our criminal ruling classes because the power behind the ideas Jefferson proposed ultimately reveal his true nature, along with his incredible integrity and aspiration in defending freedom for all future generations. He writes, "The question whether one generation of men has a right to bind another seems never to have been started either on this or our side of the water. Yet it is a question of such consequences as to not only merit decision, but place also among the fundamental principles of every government. The course of reflection in which we are immersed here on the elementary principles of society has presented this question to my mind, and that no such obligation can be so transmitted, I think very capable of proof." In his proof of this speculation, he goes on to show not only his inherent distrust of the moneylenders, the central bankers of his time, but also the immoral idea that future generations should bear the cost of debts accrued by the current societies and their governments. He felt that debts not incurred by future generations should not be borne or paid by them, and that this idea would reverberate through other areas of society, especially in the area of suppressing wars between nations. He continues, "Again, suppose Louis XV and his contemporary generation had said to the moneylenders of Genoa, 'Give us money that we may eat, drink, and be merry in our day, and on condition you will demand no interest till the end of 19.5 years, you shall then forever after receive an annual interest of 12 5/8%. The money is lent on these conditions, is divided among the living, eaten, drank, and squandered. Would the present generation be obliged to apply the produce of the earth and of their labor to replace their dissipations? Not at all." He clearly thought it highly immoral and unjust to put debt burdens on future generations for the squandered wealth of the current. But look at where we are now with a perpetually and ever-increasing national debt, which can in no way possible ever be paid off, and how devastating to our world the idea of perpetual debt has become, and how it has usurped our wealth and our rights along with it. This was clearly done by the criminal cabal known as the central bankers by design. The idea of a perpetual constitution was all part of this deception, and they have used this deception for over 2 centuries now to gradually buy up control of the world. Without the burden of perpetual and ever-increasing debt, there is no way possible they could own everything, and we would own nothing by the end of this decade, as we have been promised by Klaus Schwab and his ilk at the World Economic Forum. This is exactly how it was done, and we were warned of this incredible danger over 200 years ago. Jefferson continues with his thoughts. "Between society and society, or generation and generation, there is no municipal obligation, no umpire but the law of nature. We seem not to have perceived that, by the law of nature, one generation is to another as one independent nation to another. But with respect to future debts, would it not be wise and just for that nation to declare in the Constitution they are forming that neither the legislature nor the nation itself can validly contract more debt than they may pay within their own age, or within the term of 19.5 years? Did you hear that? With that understanding put forth, he surmised that by doing so, it would put heavy restrictions on the newly formed type of constitutional government from being able to declare expensive and unnecessary wars. Notice also his understanding and advocacy of natural law. He continues, and that all future contracts will be deemed void as to what shall remain unpaid at the end of 19.5 years from their date. This would put the lenders and the borrowers also on their guard. By reducing to the faculty of borrowing within its natural limits, it would bridle the spirit of war, to which too free a course has been procured by the inattention of moneylenders to this law of nature, that succeeding generations are not responsible for the preceding. Clearly, the moneylenders do not care about the law of nature and egregiously violate it with impunity, generation after generation. By showing that imposing current debts on future generations is highly immoral, a violation of natural law, and actually beneficial in their restriction, he then goes on to explain why constitutions are equally as limited as debt in their scope and time frame of utilization. On similar ground, it may be proved that no society can make a perpetual constitution or even a perpetual law. The earth belongs always to the living generation. They may manage it then and what proceeds from it as they please during their usufruct, which is the right to enjoy a thing without permanent damage. They are masters too of their own persons and consequently may govern them as they please. But persons and property make the sum of the objects of government. The Constitution and the laws of their predecessors extinguish then in their natural course with those who gave them being. This could preserve that being till it ceased to be itself and no longer. Every constitution then and every law naturally expires at the end of 19.5 years. If it be enforced longer, it is an act of force and not of right. It may be said that the succeeding generation, exercising in fact the power of repeal, this leaves them as free as if the constitutions or law had been expressly limited to 19.5 years only. We were never taught this, now were we? What we were taught is that the Constitution is perfect and infallible, perpetual, and only to be amended for specific purposes, but that the essential foundation should remain fully intact. This is how we have been enslaved by this false belief. Jefferson also understood that perpetual government would become corrupted and eventually taken over by subversive forces, and thus should be limited by time frames because of this as well. It might be indeed if every form of government were so perfectly contrived that the will of the majority could always be obtained fairly and without impediment. But this is true of no form. The people cannot assemble themselves. Their representation is unequal and vicious. Various checks are opposed to every legislative proposition. Factions get possession of the public councils. Bribery corrupts them. Personal interests lead them astray from the general interest of their constituents, and other impediments arise so as to prove to every practical man that a law of limited duration is much more manageable than one which needs a repeal. So again, in the incredible wisdom of perhaps our greatest founding father, law, debt, constitutions, and any power to enforce any of it should, by all moral obligation, end at certain time frames so as to allow future generations to decide what is in their best interest and not the interest of those who preceded them and faced different circumstances. I think by now a strong case has been made that the Constitution was never meant to be perpetual, and that the very idea we still hold on to this belief is tantamount to the idea that perpetual debt and the generational relief thereof, being a moral certainty, was not one in which the criminal banking class was very fond. They and their corporate puppets were the power behind creating the idea amongst the public that the Constitution should be perpetual, living, amendable, and protective of individual rights, when it was never meant or has never proven to be any of those things. It is a centuries-long psyop created by these oppressive ruling classes that has only enabled the enslavement of well-meaning and gullible populations. Freedom in this world is currently nothing more than an illusion, but something which, to be fully experienced, always has and always will require knowledge of objective truth, understanding of natural law, and eternal vigilance. Expanding upon this idea that the perpetuity of the Constitution is yet another lie told to us by the criminal ruling classes of this world, are the profound ideas and proofs that it actually holds no authority and only did so for those who actually signed it. Lysander Spooner is another figure in American history whose ideas have been all but extricated from the American lexicon and consciousness because they threaten the power of the ruling classes along with their deceptive and illegitimate authority over the populations. In going through the works of Spooner, one begins to see what a brilliant legal mind he had, along with his ability to apply logic and critical thought in ways not many ever have, either before him or since. For anyone who hasn't read or listened to the audio version of No Treason, the Constitution of No Authority, which he published in 1870, it is an absolute necessity to learn if an individual or an entire society ever truly hopes to be completely free. Here, however, I will highlight some of the most important passages of this magnum opus to finalize the point I am making in this video. To start the book, he illustrates immediately in the first paragraph that the Constitution itself has no legal binding. He writes, "The Constitution has no inherent authority or obligation. It has no authority or obligation at all, unless as a contract between man and man, and it does not so much as even purport to be a contract between persons now existing. It purports at most to be only a contract between persons living 80 years ago, and it can be supposed to have been a contract then only between persons who had already come to years of discretion, so as to be competent to make reasonable and obligatory contracts. Furthermore, we know historically that only a small portion of even the people then existing were consulted on this subject, or asked, or permitted to express either their consent or dissent in any formal manner. Those persons, if any, who did give their consent formally are all dead now. Most of them have been dead 40, 50, 60, or 70 years. And the Constitution, so far as it was their contract, died with them. They had no natural power or right to make it obligatory upon their children. It is not only plainly impossible in the nature of things that they could bind their posterity, but they did not even attempt to bind them. That is to say, the instrument does not purport to be an agreement between any body but the people then existing, nor does it, either expressly or impliedly, assert any right, power, or disposition on their part to bind anybody but themselves." Throughout the book, he gives one legal argument after another as to why this supposed supreme law of the land is merely an illusion, accepted as reality by the nation's population. And he brilliantly breaks down point by point that we are all essentially slaves to a system that operates with no legitimate authority whatsoever, other than our ignorance and compliance of it. His metaphor of the government as a more dishonorable highwayman is of particular interest because it uses ridicule and shaming to attack the very foundation of those who seek power over others. The highwayman takes solely upon himself the responsibility, danger, and crime of his own act. He does not pretend that he has any rightful claim to your money or that he intends to use it for your own benefit. He does not pretend to be anything but a robber. He has not acquired impudence enough to profess to be merely a protector, and that he takes men's money against their will merely to enable him to protect those infatuated travelers who feel perfectly able to protect themselves or do not appreciate his peculiar system of protection. He is too sensible a man to make such professions as these. Furthermore, having taken your money, he leaves you, as you wish him to do. He does not persist in following you on the road against your will, assuming to be your rightful sovereign on account of the protection he affords you. He does not keep protecting you by commanding you to bow down and serve him, by requiring you to do this and forbidding you to do that, by robbing you of more money as often as he finds it for his interest or pleasure to do so, and by branding you as a rebel, a traitor, and an enemy to your country, and shooting you down without mercy if you dispute his authority or resist his demands. He is too much of a gentleman to be guilty of such impostures and insults and villainies as these. In short, he does not, in addition to robbing you, attempt to make you either his dupe or his slave. This is without any doubt the very essence of what government is and is proven to be generation after generation. And they have only gotten more and more bold in their criminal activities as the public at large grows increasingly timid and fearful of the repercussions of speaking out in protest of their crimes. Submissive acquiescence to illegitimate authority or ridiculous demands is the refuge of the coward. To keep this video from getting too lengthy, I will only highlight 2 more excerpts from this book, but they are powerful in their admonition of not only those who promote it as their legitimate source to impose their will over you, but those who blindly accept it as the source of that illegitimate power. The ostensible supporters of the Constitution, like the ostensible supporters of most other governments, are made up of 3 classes, viz., 1. Knaves, a numerous and active class who see in the government an instrument which they can use for their own self-aggrandizement or wealth. 2. Dupes, a large class no doubt, each of whom, because he is allowed one voice out of millions in deciding what he may do with his own person and his own property, and because he is permitted to have the same voice in robbing, enslaving, and murdering others that others have in robbing, enslaving, and murdering himself, is stupid enough to imagine that he is a free man, a sovereign, that this is a free government, a government of equal rights, the best government on earth, and such like absurdities. 3. A class who have some appreciation for the evils of government, but either do not see how to get rid of them or choose not to so far sacrifice their personal interests as to give themselves seriously and earnestly to the work of making a change. I am clearly in a separate and unacknowledged fourth class, however, because while I fully recognize the evils of government, I do see how we get rid of them. And I have sacrificed my private interest in earnestly working towards making a change in all of my work. One final passage from this book sums it all up. It is in fact the last paragraph of this vitally important piece of American literature. Inasmuch as the Constitution was never signed nor agreed to by anybody as a contract, and therefore never bound anybody, and is now binding upon nobody, and is moreover such a one as no people can ever hereafter be expected to consent to, except as they may be forced to do so at the point of a bayonet, it is perhaps of no importance what its true legal meaning as a contract is. Nevertheless, the writer thinks it proper to say that, in his opinion, the Constitution is no such instrument as it has generally been assumed to be, but that by false interpretations and naked usurpations, the government has been made in practice a very widely and almost wholly different thing from what the Constitution itself purports to authorize. He has heretofore written much and could write much more to prove that such is the truth. But whether the Constitution really be one thing or another, this much is certain, that it has either authorized such a government as we have had, or has been powerless to prevent it. In either case, it is unfit to exist. So there you have it. This video should have proven beyond the shadow of any doubt you may have had by now that the Constitution is not at all what we were brought up to believe it is or was. America has been operating under all 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto for quite a while, and its Constitution has done absolutely nothing to stop the slow creep of a socialist, totalitarian government from taking over or to protect the rights, freedom, and property of the American people. What more needs to be said? Looking at it with a truly critical mind, one can only come to the conclusion that it is, in fact, another piece of the puzzle to the illusory false reality in which we are all now currently enslaved. And only in coming to terms with this realization can we begin to see the only true path forward for humanity if we ever hope to be free in our lifetimes and in this world. Add to this the fact that it was written expressly in our founding document, the Declaration of Independence, that when a government becomes destructive of its means and sole purpose to protect our inalienable rights, it is our right and our duty to abolish and replace it. Everything we have been told by supposed authorities has been a lie, and in accepting these lies as truth and acting upon them, we have harmed ourselves in ways most have never been able to discern. The Great Awakening is upon us, however, and the apocalypse or Great Unveiling is here. We either accept the fact that we have been deceived and work towards seeking truth and healing the world, or we will all be living in a dystopian nightmare of our own making due to our ignorance, apathy, and the arrogance to not have accepted that we were at fault or could have possibly been deceived. Like everything else one believes that is fully unsupported by proofs in natural law, to continue living with the belief that the Constitution has any legitimate authority over you, your life, or your property is as absurd as believing that COVID-19 is real and that we must obey the dictates that have risen from that fraud as well. It is time for humanity to evolve, rise above the current level of consciousness, and unite to create a world that actually does abide by natural law and create a system that works for everyone in a win-win-win spirit of empowerment for all. In the remaining 6 parts of this series, I will go over the entirety of the new Constitution for a Natural Law Republic that I have written and explain why every part is included, referring back to this video and the words of the Founding Fathers as justification for constructing a new societal model and social order in the way that I have. It is only in first imagining a better world and way of doing things that we will ever begin to move towards that destination. But once we begin the process and begin to share the excitement of an actual viable solution, the momentum should begin to accelerate. One man cannot change the world, but one man can give the world an idea that can change it. But that one man needs others to share his work and vision. 10 people cannot change the world, nor 100, 1,000, or even 10,000. For this plan to be effectively implemented, in my estimation, it will require the commitment of 10% of the population to do so. In America, that will be roughly 32 million people. By the time that milestone has been achieved, everything will be in place to make the seamless and peaceful transition to a new system that restores power back to the individual, guarantees their sovereignty, and puts checks and balances in place that will make oppression or coercion from any others or groups of people nearly impossible moving forward. So please take the time to complete watching the remaining 6 parts of this series to fully understand the power of this proposal and the real protection that this system bestows upon every individual in every nation that chooses to institute this type of constitutional system of societal management. Then, watch and share the other 2 companion series, Manifesting a New Reality and The Path to Freedom, to fully understand the vision and power behind an idea whose time has finally come to bring to fruition. Together, we can create the world we all truly want in our hearts, but until now, had no idea how it could be accomplished. This is how we do it, and it can all be done in the coming year. We really have no other or better options, and if we do this, we may as well go all the way to complete freedom and stop attempting to fix a system not only broken beyond repair, but one that was never intended to be kept in perpetuity from its very inception. It's time for us to unite and focus on a single solution that will ensure the emancipation of all humanity from its current state of bondage. This is the one solution that does that. There is no reason to waste time with other endeavors because it will only delay our eventual and ultimate success. If we all focus our energy and efforts on manifesting this new reality, we will get there. There is no way possible that we cannot. This is the true law of attraction, and it is an immutable law of nature that, when applied, will lead us to a time of healing and an era of incredible creative synergy we have never experienced in human history.